You watched the price climb. You saw your positions turn green. And then, without warning, everything froze. Trading halted, not because of a glitch, not because of volatility, but because you were winning. And within hours, the rule book was rewritten. This isn't speculation. This is documented market manipulation. And what happened next proves they'll do anything to protect themselves when retail traders threaten their profits. The halt came at precisely the wrong moment, or perhaps the right moment, depending on whose side you're on. Momentum was building toward a critical breakout level. Technical indicators were aligning. Volume was surging. And then, silence. The charts stopped moving. Order books froze. And in that silence, the real action began behind closed doors. Let me walk you through exactly what happened, step by step, because understanding the mechanics of this theft is essential to protecting yourself in the future. The price was surging past critical resistance levels that had held for months. Momentum was building like a coiled spring. Retail investors were piling in, and the big players were hemorrhaging money on their short positions. The pain trade was accelerating. Every tick higher meant billions in losses for institutions that had bet against the move. Then came the halt. Trading platforms simultaneously froze buy orders across multiple brokers. The official reason? Risk management protocols. The real reason? They needed time to change the game. While you sat locked out of your positions, unable to buy, unable to sell, unable to do anything except watch your screen, emergency meetings were happening behind closed doors. Exchange officials, clearinghouses, and prime brokers were on conference calls. The transcripts will never be made public, but the results speak for themselves. They weren't discussing market stability, they were discussing survival. Their risk models showed catastrophic losses if the trend continued for even another 24 hours. The math was simple and brutal. Either they stopped the rally, or they faced margin calls that would cascade through the entire financial system. So they made a choice: rewrite the rules or face insolvency. Within 6 hours of the halt, new margin requirements appeared on exchange websites. No press release, no advance warning. Just a quiet update to the rulebook posted in the middle of the night when most traders were asleep. This wasn't a modest adjustment to account for volatility. This was a doubling, sometimes tripling of the cash needed to hold positions. Traders who had been following every rule, who had maintained proper risk management, who had done everything right, suddenly received margin calls. Not because their positions moved against them, but because the goalposts moved while they were locked out of the game. Think about what this means in practical terms. You put down $10,000 to control a position worth $100,000. The leverage was clearly stated in the contract you signed. The rules were transparent when you entered the trade. You followed every requirement. Your position was profitable. You were winning. Then, overnight, they demanded $25,000 by market open, or they would liquidate your position at whatever price benefited them most. And here's the cruelest part. They made this change while your buy button was disabled. You couldn't add funds by closing other positions because you couldn't trade. You were trapped. But the margin hikes were just the opening move in a coordinated attack. Next came position limits. These restrictions appeared just hours after the margin changes, creating a 1-2 punch designed to maximize forced selling. Suddenly, accounts that could hold 100 contracts were restricted to 20. New orders were rejected with vague error messages that provided no real explanation. Maximum position size reached. Regulatory compliance required. Account restrictions in effect. These weren't system errors or bugs in the platform. They were barriers erected specifically to prevent you from adding to winning trades, while simultaneously allowing institutional players to maintain their massive positions. The rules applied selectively, enforced asymmetrically, designed to benefit one class of market participant at the expense of another. And here's where it gets truly sinister, where the conspiracy becomes undeniable. While retail buy buttons were disabled, While your orders were rejected, while you received error messages, institutional selling continued uninterrupted. The order books filled with massive sell walls. Blocks that no retail trader could ever afford appeared at key psychological levels. Someone was allowed to dump enormous positions while you were forced to watch helplessly. The price began to fall, not from natural selling pressure, not because the fundamentals changed, but from orchestrated liquidations. They created an artificial avalanche designed to trigger stop losses and shake out weak hands who panicked when they saw the price dropping. The mechanics of this manipulation are worth understanding because they reveal just how sophisticated and calculated this theft really is. When margin requirements increase, traders must either deposit more cash or reduce their positions. For retail traders, this often means forced selling. But institutional players have credit lines with their prime brokers. They can meet margin calls without liquidating. So the rule change disproportionately impacts small traders while leaving big players untouched. It's a weapon that only fires in one direction. The position limits serve a similar purpose, but even more precisely targeted. By capping the number of contracts an account can hold, they prevent retail traders from scaling into winning positions. You can't add to your trade as it moves in your favor. You can't pyramid your winners. But institutional accounts aren't individuals. They're legal entities that can be subdivided, restructured, and reorganized to circumvent position limits. A hedge fund can trade through a dozen different entities, each staying under the limit while collectively holding massive positions. Retail traders don't have this option. The rules are designed to bind you while remaining flexible for them. The playbook is always the same, repeated across different markets and different assets, with minor variations but identical core mechanics. First, halt trading to stop momentum and create uncertainty. The psychological impact of a halt cannot be overstated. It makes traders question whether something is fundamentally wrong. It creates doubt where there was confidence. Second, change the rules to force liquidations. This creates selling pressure that appears natural on the charts, but is actually manufactured by regulatory intervention. Third, allow only selling to crash the price. This accelerates the decline and triggers technical breakdowns that further panic the market. Fourth, buy back their short positions at artificially suppressed levels. This is the payoff, the moment where institutional losses turn into profits extracted from retail traders. Then, quietly, restrictions lift and trading resumes as if nothing happened. By then, retail traders have been wiped out, and the institutions have covered their losses using your money. The market returns to normal, the incident is forgotten, and the cycle begins again. The most damning evidence of manipulation comes from comparing different markets. Look at what happened in the futures market versus the physical market. While paper prices were being manipulated downward through forced selling and artificial supply, physical premiums exploded. Dealers were charging 30 to 40% over spot price to deliver actual metal. Some were refusing to sell at any price, citing supply constraints. This gap between paper and physical proves beyond doubt that the paper price is fiction. The real price, the one you pay for tangible assets you can hold in your hand, tells the truth the exchanges want to hide. When futures say $75 but physical costs $105, the market is screaming that something is broken. The price discovery mechanism has failed. The futures market, which is supposed to reflect real supply and demand, has become a tool for price suppression. This divergence also reveals something crucial about the nature of these markets. The paper market can be manipulated because it's backed by nothing but promises. Contracts can be created out of thin air. Margin requirements can be changed with a keystroke. Position limits can be imposed overnight. But the physical market is constrained by reality. There is only so much metal in vaults. There are only so many bars available for delivery. Industrial users need real supply, not paper promises. When the gap between paper and physical widens, it's a clear signal that the paper market has lost legitimacy. Smart money sees this and acts accordingly, moving away from futures and toward physical possession. They're also deploying psychological warfare through their media apparatus. Within hours of the halt and rule changes, financial media outlets began publishing coordinated narratives. These outlets, funded through advertising revenue from the very banks executing these schemes, immediately framed the story in a specific way. Articles appeared calling the move speculative excess and praising the regulatory intervention as necessary to prevent a bubble. Commentators went on television warning about the dangers of retail speculation. Opinion pieces declared that position limits protect investors from themselves. The message was clear and unified. This was necessary, prudent, and for your own good. But here's what they won't tell you. Those same media outlets remained silent when institutional traders took massive leveraged positions that required government bailouts. They said nothing when banks accumulated short positions so large they threatened the stability of entire markets. They offered no warnings when leverage ratios at major institutions reached 30 or 40 to 1. The concern for market stability only appears when retail traders start winning. The calls for regulation only come when institutional profits are threatened. This selective outrage exposes the media's true function, not to inform, but to manage narratives on behalf of their sponsors. They want you to believe this intervention was necessary. They want you to accept that when you win, when your analysis proves correct, when your risk management succeeds, the game must be stopped for your own protection. It's gaslighting on a systemic scale. They're trying to convince you that up is down, that theft is protection, that cheating is regulation, and they're counting on you not understanding the mechanics well enough to see through the deception. But the deception goes even deeper. Buried in the exchange rulebooks are clauses that give officials extraordinary powers during declared emergencies. These force majeure provisions allow exchanges to void contracts, impose cash settlements at arbitrary prices, and suspend delivery requirements. In other words, if the squeeze continues despite their cheating, they have a nuclear option. They can simply declare that delivery is impossible, cancel all contracts, and settle in cash based on prices they choose. This transforms your property right into a discretionary payment. They're preparing the legal framework to default on their obligations while protecting themselves from liability. The regulatory agencies that are supposed to prevent this kind of manipulation are nowhere to be found. Where are the investigations into coordinated trading halts across multiple platforms? Where are the inquiries into why margin requirements changed during a trading freeze? Where are the hearings about position limits that appeared overnight without public comment? The silence is deafening because the regulators are captured. They're staffed by former executives from the very institutions they're supposed to oversee. The revolving door between Wall Street and Washington ensures that enforcement remains theoretical, while violations remain practical. Meanwhile, as all this manipulation unfolds in plain sight, the fundamental supply situation continues to deteriorate. The physical shortage that drove the price higher in the first place hasn't been resolved. In fact, it's getting worse. Industrial demand continues to grow as new technologies require more material. Electric vehicles, solar panels, electronics manufacturing, all of these sectors need increasing amounts of supply. But mine production isn't keeping pace. Existing mines are depleting, ore grades are falling. No major new discoveries have been made in years. The deficit between production and consumption widens every quarter. This is why the banks are so desperate. They can manipulate the paper price, but they can't manipulate geology. They can force retail traders to sell, but they can't force miners to produce more. They can change margin requirements, but they can't change the laws of physics. The fundamental shortage will eventually overwhelm any amount of paper manipulation. When factories start shutting down because they lack raw materials, when industrial users start bidding against each other for limited supply, the price will go vertical. regardless of what rules the exchanges impose. The banks are also facing pressure from an unexpected direction: China. While Western exchanges manipulate prices downward, Chinese buyers accelerate their accumulation. The Shanghai Gold Exchange operates outside the jurisdiction of American regulators. Chinese institutions see the artificially suppressed prices as a gift. They're draining Western vaults, using the manipulated paper price to acquire physical metal at a discount. Every ton that moves east is one less ton available for Western industrial use. The geopolitical implications are staggering. By cheating to protect short-term profits, Western banks are inadvertently transferring strategic resources to a rival power. They halted trading because they were losing. They changed the rules because the free market was bankrupting them. The margin hikes, position limits, and buy restrictions weren't risk management. They were theft, executed legally through rule changes written by the same people who were bleeding money. The coordinated media narrative, the regulatory silence, the selective enforcement, all of it proves this was planned and orchestrated. But here's what they didn't count on. Every time they cheat this openly, they create more believers, more people who understand the system is rigged, more people who see through the propaganda, more people who will never trust paper markets again. They think they've won because they stopped the rally, but they've actually lost something far more valuable: legitimacy. The masks have fallen. The theft is visible. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. They can change the rules, manipulate the price, and control the narrative, but they can't change reality. The supply deficit is real. The industrial demand is real. The empty vaults are real. And reality is coming for them. The only question is whether you'll be holding paper promises when the reckoning arrives, or whether you'll be holding something they can't print, manipulate, or regulate away. Choose wisely. The game is rigged, but the outcome is not.